Hi, everybody. My name is Damien Cummings. I'm the CEO of PeopleWave, and welcome to PeopleWave's first live broadcast on YouTube. What we're doing today is going through a webinar on the future of HR. And I'm going to be talking about the very exciting topic for me, which is employee relationship management, or ERM, which is the next wave of what's happening in the HR and people management space. So before we begin, there's a few things you need to understand. So first of all, this is our very first broadcast, so please forgive us if there are any technical hitches. Number two, I'd love to kind of field any questions you have. We've had some questions come in via email already. And if you do have any questions, please just wait till the end and you can type into the chat bar, which should be on your side. And as we get into it, we're really going to talk some controversial ideas about HR and the future of what people management look like. If you want to have an in-depth conversation with us or with me around these ideas offline, I'm very happy to kind of have a discussion, take you through what we do at PeopleWave, or explain where the future of the industry might go on a one-to-one basis. So what I'm going to do now is kind of get into it. I'll just quickly do a screen share of my PowerPoint presentation. So excuse me one second. And what you'll see there is a lovely PowerPoint slide for today's webinar, the future of HR, ERM. So for the next 40 to 45 minutes, what I'm going to do is explain this new concept of ERM. First of all, a little bit about me. My name is Damien. I'm the CEO of PeopleWave. Now, PeopleWave is a Singapore-based HR tech company. We're focused on building cloud and blockchain tools to help people managers. We use data to actually engage both employees and managers, and we're pioneering the whole ERM field. Now, my personal experience is coming 25 years in the digital transformation space. Now, I started off at McKinsey & Company 26 years ago, a long time ago, and I've got a few gray hairs since then. And I've worked at some very prestigious brands such as Coca-Cola, Ogilvy, Samsung, Philips, and Standard Chartered, in increasingly more senior digital and marketing roles. For the last 2.5 years, we've been on a journey at PeopleWave to really reinvent how people management is done using data-driven decisions around people and managers. As I said, I'm very happy to continue the conversation. If you want to email me after this, feel free to do that. My email is damien@peoplewave.co, or you can connect with me on Twitter, LinkedIn, or read my blog. So, first of all, the widely held view is that employees leave managers, not companies. This is backed up by a lot of research out there, and this is probably not a surprise. It's really not so much the company you're working in, but the immediate experience of working with your manager, peers, and the people that actually hold your career in their hands. Every time you or another employee leaves a company, it costs that company about $20,000. Now, you could argue very senior people cost a lot more to replace and hire. For more junior member of staff, that's going to be a lower number. But from our data, what we've seen is roughly about $20,000 for cost of hiring. And what that is broken up into things like recruitment. A recruitment agency will generally charge about 20% of a person's annual salary. There's lost productivity. So when somebody leaves, there's not an immediate hire replacement. What happens is that usually a few months pass while there's no one doing that particular role. So it's a huge cost of business. And if you've ever been a hiring manager or in a position where you're a line manager now, you know how difficult it is to lose good people. But this is one of the kind of key facts that are always lost in the conversation around HR. People are the largest cost in any business. On average, it's about 70% of any organization's labor, cost of labor. Now, I've been in a marketing role in the past, and I've managed sales P&Ls as well. The money that you manage on behalf of a company is always very tightly controlled. However, the costs of a company are very loosely controlled. And frankly, if you look at almost any company in the world, these costs are not particularly managed well. We often leave it up to line managers or mid-level managers, often without training or experience, to manage their staff and to manage their staff turnover. On the HR side, as I go through this webinar, what you'll see is that HR are fundamentally not ready to manage people. It's not their job. They're more focused on managing risk, compliance, and the processes around bringing people in and exiting the organization. So with such an amazingly large figure, how do you manage better? And of course, for us, so why are your people and costs managed so poorly? And here's where I'm going to get into some of the challenges that both HR and people managers face. So, the problem with HR today. Now, for those of you who are in the HR field, forgive me in advance, I did say it would be a little bit controversial, but this also shouldn't be a surprise. The focus at the moment for HR leaders is primarily around risk and compliance. Means that HR managers are not focused on people management. HR leaders will be focused on things like recruitment, talent acquisition, building an employer brand, putting in place processes around compensation and benefits, and of course the annual appraisal system. Except for the last point, none of that really has to do with great people management. Now for HR leaders, they have an ongoing problem, which is about the HR systems that they have. There are many great platforms out there like SAP SuccessFactors or Workday, but those HR systems are fundamentally geared towards managing simple tasks: time and attendance, leave management, and payroll. Nobody has ever, in the history of the world, joined a company based on the HR system or left a company based on their leave management, time and attendance, or payroll platform. Frankly, employees just don't care. And none of that has to do with good people management. The bigger problem is also people managers aren't trained. So if you've gone to business school or university, you don't learn anything to do with real-world social skills, managing difficult employees, and actually bringing people into your company. Most people have learned from their managers. And of course, most people are unhappy with their manager. So we find that managers are not trained, they haven't got the right skills, training, or tools. And another important part with HR is that there's just no data. Now, yes, there are some simple aspects of data that are captured, things like your name, your email address, maybe your bank info for payroll, and of course, things like your CV. But your data on your relationships, how well you're performing in the job, the skills you've developed, are they improving or declining? None of that is captured, and none of that is turned into data points which are actionable. So as a manager, how do you know what's going on with your team? And here are some of the people manager problems. Often, a manager manages by meeting. That becomes even worse in a situation where you're managing a remote workforce. In Singapore, where I'm based, in previous roles I've had, I might be managing hundreds of people across many, many countries. It's just so difficult to actually build quality face time or to truly understand who's in your team. So those meetings tend to be one-on-one meetings and team meetings. But of course, everyone's been to meetings before. You realize that managing by meeting is a terrible way to manage. It leads to misconceptions. It also means that there's an automatic bias towards the more extroverted people in that group, and it really doesn't give you a great understanding of how well your people are doing. The second people manager problem is the annual appraisal. Most companies are looking at performance as meeting a set of goals. Now, goals can work quite well, but are often poorly written, are subjective, and one of the biggest problems is history is forgotten. If you've done an amazing job this month in May, but maybe you did a quite poor job back in January, that history is often forgotten, and there's a recency bias that starts to creep in. That's not the only bias. Managers often play favorites. If you're in a position where you're managing, say, 10 or more people, you're going to actually base your decision around whether someone gets promoted, whether they should get transferred to a better role, or whether they get an increase in pay based on likability. So generally, people who are more favored and liked generally will get a higher rating and review. And so often there's a lack of understanding. So for managers, often it's about gut feel. So many great managers, particularly experienced ones, are looking at, I really like this person, or I'm going to make this decision quickly and move fast. There's no data around it, and it's much more perception-based than it is based on reality or based on data. So with those kind of problems in mind about HR more focused on compliance and things like recruitment and the underlying workflow, and people manager not really having the right skills training, what is ERM and how can ERM help? Here's a simple definition. Now, there's not much out there on ERM. There's a great Wikipedia page. There's a few other vendors that are looking at this space. But ERM is quite simple. Many of you might be familiar with the concept of CRM, which is about customer relationship management, which uses data to engage a customer. ERM uses data to engage and make decisions on your employees. It's a foundation of good management between a manager and their team. It's the data and tool set that allows you to manage your people well. Explaining that in a bit more detail. Now, ERM is not about recruitment. Recruitment is a little bit earlier, and it's also not really about exits and resignations. Though there is a case to be made for an alumni or an ongoing experience around maintaining an employer brand. That's a little different from what ERM is. So ERM really kind of falls into a few categories. Number one, after the job of recruitment is done, you've got great candidates come through, you've interviewed those people, then they're actually going to go through a process of onboarding. Now, onboarding, as I'll explain a little bit later, tends to be a tactical process today. Managers are kind of not really involved in that process. They've outsourced that to administrative assistants or to the HR group. And right now, the perception of onboarding is about getting a security badge, a computer, a desk, maybe a t-shirt, and turning up on day one. The new ERM is really not so much about onboarding, but about managing that performance of a new hire coming through from the first day all the way through to their first 3 to 6 months in the job. It's around data-driven decision-making and quickly ramping up into productivity. Next, we've got performance reviews. Now, again, I don't believe in annual appraisals and performance reviews, but what I do believe in is continuous feedback. What we're seeing with ERM is that one of the foundations of ERM is about continuous data-driven feedback. So there are many things to measure. It could be goals, it could be OKRs or KPIs. It could be looking at competencies or strength of relationships and so on. It doesn't really matter what you're measuring. The idea of actually getting 360 feedback and getting different points of view on a continuous basis is one of the core parts of ERM. Next is about competency assessment and development. So often, managers have a development plan as part of what they do for an employee, but that's kind of made up. So at the end of a annual review, they'll sit down with an employee and make some arbitrary decisions around whether they should improve some skills, whether they need to go for some training, and also whether they need to improve in particular competencies. Now, what ERM does is really start to measure in a data-driven way whether competencies or skills have improved. So, for example, if you're a sales leader and you're going out and presenting to a whole bunch of potential prospects and partners, has your presentation skills improved or declined over time? If you go into some learning and development or training, you should assume that skill goes up. But at the moment, people management and HR fails to measure those skills and whether they've improved or declined after learning or training. So getting a data benchmark around competencies, how they improve and decline over time, green flags and red flags in performance become really important. Next is about promotions, internal recruitment, and mobility. Now, so often, internal mobility is really about some manager somewhere in the world putting a job ad up on an intranet and hoping for the best. Now, what will often happen in large-sized companies is maybe 10 or 20 people who apply for that job, often because they know the person doing it or knew the team that was actually hiring, but it's a bit of hush-hush behind closed doors process. Wouldn't it be great if you can actually use data, and particularly performance data, to look at every single employee in your organization to get the best possible fit for the new role that you're hiring? 70% of all recruitment is done internally, but the problem is the succession plan process is murky. It's not clear how you get the next job ahead of you or how you get your boss's job. Often it is deemed a secret, so a manager can't really reveal to their staff members who's going to take over from them if they move on to the next job. And internal recruitment is really about who's the best networker, who can get in front of that hiring manager as quickly as possible. So again, with a data-driven decision-making and ERM, suddenly all this becomes a lot more transparent and internal moves become a lot more managed and the secrecy starts to go away as transparency lifts. And finally, what most people don't talk about that much is once people exit. Now, when people resign out of a company, it's often a pretty heartbreaking experience and a little bit awkward. You might conduct an exit interview, but either people are going to go for broke and actually say highly negative things about the company and their boss, or they're going to keep their mouth shut and just move on to the next thing. There's got to be a better way of doing this. And for me, what ERM does is really provide a continuous monthly set of data points, and you can see where someone's declining in their performance or improving. So there shouldn't really be a surprise about someone exiting, and when they do get to a point of exit, you build up a certain amount of trust between the manager and the employee, so they can truly give you the reasons why they're leaving. Now, we all hope they've moved on to something bigger and better with more money, but it could be a management style issue, an issue with their boss, an issue with other stakeholders, or generally an unhappiness with the company. And those kind of things need to be surfaced for good management to happen. Now, these are really the cornerstones of what ERM is. Now, at this point, you might be thinking, well, I do some of this already. Am I already doing ERM? Well, one of the best ways of looking at this is to look at how ERM is different to traditional HR workflow and what we call HRIS. And those are systems like SAP SuccessFactors and Workday. Now, down the bottom, if I can direct your attention to the big gray box, traditional HRIS and HR looks at some of these areas. So recruitment, a very traditional process of putting a job ad up there, sending over a CV as a candidate, and getting the job through an interview process. Onboarding is about the HR and admin setting up the new hire, getting a contract signed, getting them into a desk, giving them a computer, etc. Then there's annual appraisal, which is often either not done at all, or it's a 6-month touch point with a 12-month review of goals, which should be then fed into compensation and benefits, which is a little later. We have leave management. Leave management is very simple. It's every person in the world is entitled to a certain amount of time off, and there's usually systems to do that. In some companies, they look at time and attendance. Certainly with more junior roles or factory workers or retail workers, the time they clock in and clock out becomes important. Comp and Ben, as I talked about, is really kind of an outcome of what happens with the annual appraisal, but understanding how much someone is paid, what their benefits are, and what other insurances that are around their business. Again, they usually sit in HRIS or with the HR leader. And finally, there are things like payroll. Everyone loves to get paid at the end of the month, so having a payroll system that does that is very important. As you can imagine, all those 7 points down below don't really have anything to do with people management. All those systems are HR-centric, they're internal, they have very limited oversight by a manager, and of course, there's no real data that's captured or used. Above, there's 4, foundation elements to talk about ERM. First of all, you have to have real-time data and analytics, or as close to real-time as you can. Monthly continuous feedback, data on performance, data on skills, data on the employee, such as the simple things about diversity. So often, HR systems fail to capture or use simple things like gender or nationality to give you a sense of the reporting of where your performance lies in terms of either nationality, gender within your leadership team, gender within your team itself. Of course, there needs to be a two-way interaction. Traditional HR is really about a one-way interaction. Once you've got the job, you'll be given a set of things that you need to complete. But in ERM, there's a two-way relationship where the manager and employee are effectively working with each other. Continuous feedback is critical, and of course, the manager is focused much more on performance development. They're not managing payroll, they're not actually signing off on timesheets. What they're really doing is making sure they focus on how do I retain my best employees, or how do I make quick decisions around poor performance in my company. So what I'm going to do is then go through some of the top use cases of ERM. There's 3 I want to identify today. One is about what's called employee experience. I'm going to talk about things like onboarding and career development. Next, I'll talk about performance management, moving beyond annual goals into continuous feedback. And of course, I want to talk about the core relationship between a boss and their employee, the manager and their team, and how you can use data to better understand and engage that team. So, starting off with an employee experience. So the key question is this employee experience? Now, what's often written up in the media or what's put out there on social media is you see great examples of guys like Uber or Facebook actually putting the latest MacBook on your table, giving you a t-shirt, branded merchandise, and so on. But does that really matter if you don't know who to speak to? Your boss isn't around on the first day, and you have no idea where your career is going to go? So the point with this is, don't get bamboozled too much about this. While it's cool to get a mug and a cap and some marketing materials, that should kind of happen anyway. Employee experience is a lot larger. Now, looking at ERM and employee experience, ERM does start with employee experience. First of all, when you look at employee experience, how do you make sure things are simple and effective? So does your organization provide your employees with the means to do their job well? Now, even with HR systems, it doesn't make life easier. You got to fill in huge amounts of forms. There's a lot of complexity around an organization. It's just really tough. Let alone the fact that IT are very stringent around what websites you can use and how to do your job. Now, if your company culture is really about how to make life as difficult as possible, ERM can't really help you. You need to make sure that the environment is great, is easy to do business, and can be set up for the employee to do their job well. Next, are employees happy? Now, happiness doesn't require you to bring in a gourmet chef and have meals 5 times a day. Happiness is really, are you generally in a psychologically safe and secure environment? Are you happy with where you're working? Is it a bit of a noise-free environment, so you don't get too kind of caught up in people's loud conversations near you? And of course, is happiness measured? And often, happiness measurement is really called employee engagement, but understanding what drives happiness. Is it the relationship between having friends at work? Is it about co-workers and manager relationships? Is it about the happiness with the job scope they have and their role purpose? And again, how are those things measured? So happiness can be absolutely critical, and certainly is for retention. What I love is that point 3, employee experience, even from day one, should really be about giving the new employee a clear sense of their trajectory in the organization. Are they going to be the next CEO? And if they're not going to be the next CEO, what role are they going to get? How do you map out a 5, 10, 20-year career path for that person? Now, that might not ever happen. It could be you're in a specialist role and you're kind of stuck where you are. But I think nobody wants to be a cog in a machine. And understanding how you can grow in the company, even if it's a lateral move or taking over from your boss, and clearly articulating the skills, the experience, the projects they need to lead to get there becomes important. It's about transparency, it's about building trust, and it's also about giving someone hope that they can build a great career in this company if they do the right things. And finally, culture. So hard to define, but does an employee live something that's unique and peculiar to the company? And of course, can managers explain it? I find it hard when I go into the big digital companies, the Googles and the Facebooks of the world. It's almost like a cult going into those companies. I can't truly understand what differentiates one from the other. I'm sure from the outside, it is tough to find out, but they all kind of seem very, very samey, very Silicon Valley, very kind of I've drunk the Kool-Aid together. Now, how do you define your culture? Now, it doesn't really matter whether you're a small fish and chip store or whether you're a kind of multi-billion-dollar giant. Having that clearly articulated thing that's not marketing speak, that's something unique to your company that managers could explain to the team simply, is a great part of employee experience. And that actually helps us a lot with our ERM strategy. So getting into it, so here are some things you can do to make life a whole lot easier around ERM and employee experience. First of all, if you don't have it already, get digital onboarding. Now, this is an employee-centric digital onboarding. It's not about putting a whole bunch of barriers in front of the new hire. It's really about giving them a mobile app, giving them a great seamless experience, setting expectations of the things they've got to do, connecting them to their network, giving them a sense of what they need to do to pass their probation. So much stress on a new hire of, are they going to fit in? Have they been promised what the recruitment agents, are they going to deliver on the promise of recruitment? Is it the right job for them? So if you can make things simple and focus on giving them the right things to do to perform well in their role, digital onboarding is a must. Employee engagement, I love employee engagement, but so many companies spend a hell of a lot of money on the annual employee engagement survey. Modern employees want continuous feedback, and modern managers need to understand where the gaps are. So if I'm managing a very large group, I want to see my team in a market like the US is highly engaged, but I'm looking over the Netherlands and I can see those guys are not. I want to see that my marketing team has some issues in these areas, but my IT team is actually kind of powering ahead. I need to understand at an individual, a manager, and a functional level where the employee engagement gaps are happening and how to fix them. Next, we've got development. Now, development plans are not really about saying thank you, and a lot of the literature in the HR and people management space is about kind of offering gratitude and saying thank you to employees and managers. Now, nothing wrong with that. You should do it, but giving feedback is about improvement. So you have to kind of draw the line between giving critical feedback and just saying thank you for a job well done. The best way to do that is actually use objective measures of data and use that to give feedback to people. So for example, internally at PeopleWave, what we do is we measure a set of soft skills. Those skills tend to be things like communications, resilience, and adaptability. So I can tell we're across 4 countries, and I can tell how individuals are performing, I can tell how our different teams are performing, and I can see where we're going up and down across these different values and or soft skills. So if I wanted to put a development plan together, it's actually quite straightforward. I can see it with the data in front of me. It's not a guess, it's not an opinion, and it's certainly not subjective. It's based on data. Now finally, when we get to culture, I think the biggest thing you can do in culture around employees' experience is just give employees as much freedom as possible. I've worked in very restrictive environments where you don't have access to websites, social media, you can't see YouTube, you can't go to blogs, you can't do anything, you can't go to banking sites. And I get it, you know, the CEO and the IT team want to make sure that you're spending time doing work, but the reality is, why do you have to make it so hard? Having platforms like Slack, having platforms like social media is generally a good thing if you can push employees in the right direction. Allow people freedom and give them the technology they desire, particularly consumer technology that they're used to, makes employee experience a whole lot better. And it shapes your culture. So the second use case is about performance management. Now, I think this is probably the strongest use case with ERM, really using data to manage and develop employees. So there are 4 areas I wanted to cover off. So in ERM, first of all, performance reviews must be done differently. Almost in the opposite of what Facebook is doing, employees have to own their own data. Now, there's often a conversation we have at PeopleWave with potential customers and entities like the government asking who owns their own data. So often the answer is going to be that the company owns your data. So if you look at things like how well you've performed in the job, it could even be things like your job title, are you a manager, what achievements you've got, have you taken revenue from X to Y or improved it by Z%. That's the kind of thing that starts popping up on CVs, starts popping up on your LinkedIn profile. Why don't we take it a step further and actually formalize that? We can verify that and put that onto a blockchain solution. We can put that into a database. We can effectively allow the companies to use that data. So it shouldn't just be across the achievement of goals. That's a bit of a flawed metric. What we found is that it's 3 things that drive performance. It's goals, your relationships, and your competencies. So getting data across all those different areas of how well you've met goals, both short and long term. Do you have the right skills, both hard and soft skills? Have you achieved in your role? Are you a suitable fit for the role? Are you working well with other team members? And getting that data on a continuous basis is critical. Next, development. I've talked about this earlier, but having a clear sense of are your competencies improving or declining is extremely important. While competency frameworks are mapped out by most HR professionals, they're only really used for talent acquisition and recruitment. So it'll appear in a job ad, it'll appear in a pay scale decision, but as soon as you turn up to the job on day 1, you suddenly lose those competencies. And even in jobs where you need to kind of transform a company, and I've been in roles where you need to do things like digital transformation, there's no way I can map out who's got great digital competency and who doesn't. So starting to get a sense of those competencies and are they improving is going to be critical. Now, pay planning is a controversial one. Often this is hidden behind closed doors in the HR room and maybe with a few senior managers, but understanding where you sit. So what is your job grade? How much do you get paid? Are you ahead or behind industry averages? And how are you benchmarking? It could be critical to understand where you sit. So if you're in a market like the Philippines versus someone in the US, someone in the US is bound to get paid more money. But as long as it's benchmarked back to industry and local averages, that's not necessarily a bad thing. What that can do is if you start opening it up and using data, people can make the right decisions. Maybe you've got an amazing performer in the Philippines that could actually kind of absolutely crush a job that's going in the US. So moving them over from mobility-wise from one market to the other, even if you have to pay them more, is probably going to be in your best interest. So until you start capturing data, make it transparent and benchmarking it, it just becomes really difficult for you to make the right decisions. And finally, you've got things like succession planning. I see succession planning as very clear, where you've got a person who's in a current job, who's one of your team members. The first thing you've got to do is very clearly say to them, are you going to get my job or not? Can they move into their manager's role? And if they're not, you really need to understand where they want to go in your organization. If I wanted to hire somebody, it might not necessarily be from my own team. It could be from another part of the organization, could be in another country, could be in another function. So having data on performance, development, and even pay benchmarks allows you to make the right decision around succession planning and hiring people internally. So performance management for me is a cornerstone of how ERM operates. Maybe to give you a sense of how that might look, and again, here's one of the PeopleWave plugs. This is how we do it. So this is the tool that we call Performance Wave. What it does is actually allows you to use an algorithm that looks at relationship skills and role purpose. We also look at things like promotional readiness and job suitability. It's a full 360 review done by internal stakeholders and can be done by external customers or clients. They can review your performance. And with a minimum of 4 reviewers every month, you're getting data-driven feedback from a whole bunch of people. It's triggering green flags and red flags of improvement or declining in performance. It's happening on a monthly basis, and you can see where you rank. You can see where you rank as an employee in your team or in your organization. Now, not everyone's ready for that at the moment, but as we become more comfortable with data and transparency, this is where the future of ERM lies. And to illustrate that point a little bit more deeper, here's an example of what we do in terms of detailed reports. So often you want to see your history within an organization. You would like to be benchmarked against how well your team is doing, how well you're doing against your company. You could do a breakdown of things like your different attributes, say hard skills, soft skills, whether you're meeting goals or whatnot. You can look back and see whether you had any red flags, yellow flags, and green flags. And you can tell a story. Now, people might be going through a whole bunch of personal issues. Everyone's fighting a battle that we know nothing about, right? So it could be that someone's going through lost a loved one, or maybe they're going through a major illness or going through a divorce. And those issues do directly impact performance. But you can look back and those things can be explained with a story. If there's a gap in your performance as well, a gap in your working life, that could be because you've actually gone off and had a baby and need to come back. But again, your maternity or paternity leave should still be there. You should still get a sense of what your performance was like before you went away and also when you come back. And having detailed reports around how well you're doing and how well your team is doing becomes absolutely critical for a manager or a junior manager taking over an employee. So the third use case and the final use case is really about looking at the core relationship, a manager and an employee, and how do those two kind of work together very strongly. So a lot of this is about data and insights. Now, ERM, one of the most simple aspects of ERM is just having the core relationship data. Now, as much as you might spend on Workday or you spent millions on SAP, they can't give you the basic information, such as an email coming up a couple of days before saying one of your team members is celebrating their birthday or celebrating their work anniversary. So simple. But that's what CRM does in the sales and marketing world so well. CRM in that world is all about celebrating whether someone's achieved a milestone, how their family's doing, whether they're having their upcoming birthday, whether they're about to celebrate their 5 years with you as an employee. Now, those things need to be celebrated. But having the core data and understanding those things is just not there. So having it available, and not in an Excel spreadsheet, but in a system you can use to manage that, becomes really, really important. It's the small things that allow you to retain your employees well. Next, performance. As we've talked about, performance needs to be measured continuously. It's not just goals, but relationship skills, and of course, things like role suitability. Ideally monthly if you can. Next is development. It's about measuring competencies and developing them, having a clear path identified, because it's not just about improving your skills in your current role, it should be improving your skills in the next job and the job after that. Often you need to develop soft skills you don't currently have to take on a more senior position. And if you're moving, say, from a manager level to a director or a VP, then you develop a whole bunch of new skills around networking, communication, and soft skills around leadership. And engagement's so important. Engagement is currently run by the HR team, and it's an annual survey. But to manage your people well, to have the good relationship between you and your employees, you and your team, you need to understand what's happening in your team. So are you finding that people are disengaged in your team? Are you finding people are starting to become absentee? Are you finding people's overall motivation and likelihood to come into work has just declined? So having a continuous measure of engagement, mapping that to your particular team becomes really important. And in the relationship between a manager and employee, how do you map out the succession plan? Use the data you found from relationships, performance, development, and the engagement to give them a clear path to where to go next. And of course, make sure that the employee understands what that means for them, what they need to do to develop, and of course, how you actually improve their performance to get to that role. Rounding up, so there's one last thing I wanted to kind of focus on, which is really how do you get a sense of implementing ERM? It's a new idea, and there's not a lot of companies doing it at the moment. And like almost any change management, it requires some support and help. So here's kind of 4 critical things that HR can do to roll out ERM. First of all, co-create the strategy. I've spoken to maybe hundreds, if not thousands of HR people, and often the answer is, well, we don't want to do ERM or we don't want to do this because we already have a HRIS system. But what we're finding is that CEOs are now taking this conversation up. They're saying, look, 70% of my cost is people. I'm losing good people. I've got retention issues. My people managers are not trained, and I don't have a solution for it. Now, mapping it against what HR do, putting in a payroll, a REM and band system, is not solving that need. Progressive HR leaders are going to be working with their management team, the CEOs, to define a new strategy. While they're not directly managing those people, they can actually work with major leaders of different departments and the CEO to lead the charge. Second, you need to pilot somewhere. Often it's not going to be an internal pilot with HR. That does make a lot of sense. But you need to go find a very progressive, great people leader who wants to improve their performance. Conversely, if you can find a terrible people manager that wants to improve their performance, piloting an ERM project with those guys would be great. You can actually quickly improve the manager performance and you can improve the team performance. Or if they're already a fantastic manager, it's only going to make that person better. And engagement, now I don't mean employee engagement, I mean kind of more stakeholder change management. Here it's about overcoming resistance to change. We've all had that same kind of project fatigue coming through. There's too many projects, too many IT programs coming in at the moment. It's just too much. But this is so important. And it's the fundamental aspect of actually coming into a business. All businesses are people businesses. All managers have to work with their people. But again, there's no real tools to help them do that. So to do that, you need to, as a HR leader, clearly articulate to every single employee how this is going to benefit to them. Now, some people might feel uncomfortable using data, being transparent, or understanding the differences between traditional practices and software and ERM. But it's important to actually focus on education, to get change champions within an organization, and to rapidly move forward, overcoming resistance as you see it. And the last point is really about understanding data. The biggest trend in HR at the moment is hiring data scientists, looking at HR analytics, and looking at things like ERM. If you look at engagement and performance, you need to really make sure you take control of those numbers. What I found using marketing as a bit of an analogy, many years ago, marketers, well, maybe they still are, Marketers always spoke in marketing speak. They talk about brand, they talk about it, user engagement, they talk about customer lifetimes, they talk about a lot of stuff that doesn't make sense. So, and often, a CEO would stare blankly at a marketing person and say, well, I've got 1 million engagements on Facebook and 10,000 likes in the last campaign. How many sales did that generate? Same kind of thing happens in people management and HR. So you really need to drive the agenda. So why exactly are you rolling out ERM? Fundamentally, it's about saving cost. It's about saving costs in 2 areas. Number one, looking at your best people and making sure you keep them longer. Number 2, arresting the issue around retention. So often people come into an environment, it's a poor onboarding experience, people get disillusioned, they kind of nosedive quickly and they leave. There could be issues around managers and employees. Again, Gallup do a global survey where they point out that around about just under 70% of employees are disengaged and unhappy. And 80% of that unhappiness comes from their direct manager. So often, it's not the manager's fault. They just don't know how to manage well. So if you can actually take control of the data, get the right kind of managers aligned to this, make sure it's understood, the benefits are understood by all employees, everyone will get behind it. So that's the official kind of ERM kind of overview over. I'll just spend a couple of slides explaining what we do at PeopleWave. So PeopleWave, if you're interested in ERM, what we do is we're the Salesforce for HR. We have a couple of products. We started out 2.5 years ago in Singapore. We're 16 people, and we're in Singapore, Australia, Hong Kong, and Philippines. But we're servicing clients in 14 countries, including Europe, Middle East, and across Asia Pacific. We have our ERM platform is composed of a few modules. We have a first 100 days for an onboarding. We have a performance module called Performance Wave, and we have a manager ERM, which is about people analytics. What I'm most excited about is the internal mobility and recruitment module called Wavebase, which we're building out and launching at the moment and integrating back into our ERM platform. Our platform looks a little bit like this. We start with coming into the job on day one and managing the employee experience, ramping those into productivity, and that's our onboarding tool. Next, we have our Performance Wave tool, which is about data-driven appraisals. So it's not really about managing goals, but it is understanding how strong the relationships are, how good your skills, and are you delivering in your job. And of course, we have analytics. We can give you a sense of how well people are doing, give you a sense of where your competency gaps are, who your best and worst managers are, who your best and worst employees are, and how to fix some of those challenges. We've got a team of award-winning specialists, so most of us are based here in Singapore, but we're also on the ground in Hong Kong and Australia, and our development team is based in the Philippines. And finally, we've won a few awards, so not to toot our own horn too much, but we're one of the hottest startups in Asia. 2017, we're the most promising enterprise startup. In 2018, we're the hottest startup in Singapore. We just won the Pitch Deck Asia Awards earlier this year, and we're the winner of the Startup O program at the end of last year. And hopefully we'll add a few more accolades to that in the coming months. Well, with that, thank you. If you have any questions, please kind of type them into the chat now. Or if you've actually sent them in via email, I can review those in a moment. So at this point, I don't see any chat coming in. Okay, great. Well, hey, there's no questions at the moment, so we'll wrap up there. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you very much for paying attention. Love to talk to you about more ERM in the future. If you want to reach out and schedule a call with me, I'm happy to share insights, not really a sales pitch. My email is there, damien@peoplewave.co. If you are interested in our software, you can check us out at peoplewave.co, so you can actually sign up for an online demo, or you can actually meet you face-to-face. With that, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day, and have a wonderful week ahead.